Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Trident Talks, where this particular series we're discussing instant response and kind of crisis communications in the whole entire ecosystem when it comes to kind of carriers, breach coaches, and then consultancy firms as well. So, delighted to welcome Tom, Senior Director, Crisis Communications at FTI Consulting. Tom, thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
Great to be here. Thanks very much for having me. Very well, thanks.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So you've got a really interesting role, which I'm kind of very excited to kind of dig into. It's almost like the thankless task of instant response, or it's always happening in the background and people aren't overly aware of what's going on. But before we kind of get into that, do you want to just kind of give a bit of insight into who you are and kind of a bit around your background?
Yeah, sure. So I'm, as you said, Tom Bolitho, Senior Director at FTI Consulting, working within our strategic communications segment. But within that, I actually work on our cybersecurity and data privacy communications team. So day in, day out, and I should say I'm based in Washington, DC, despite the accent. We work on two things really. It's preparation before a cybersecurity incident, and it's everything after the fact, but from a communications and stakeholder management perspective. So we really support our clients, their companies, and also, more importantly, their people across all sectors when it comes to managing reputation and their ability to conduct business before, during, and after a cybersecurity incident. And before my time at FTI, I was doing a very similar role at Brunswick, and then prior to that, I served as an infantry officer within the Grenadier Guards, so within the British Army, for 6 years.
Nice. And did you I mean that's a very interesting role, which we come on to. But when you're in the forces, did you know this is the kind of direction you're gonna want to take, or did you just kind of fall into this position?
Absolutely not. If you'd asked me when I was leaving, or told me when I was leaving that I'd end up working in strategic communications, my first question would have been, "What on earth is that?" And the second question would be, "How do I even start?" I'm not someone with a big quote unquote PR background. I don't understand what it is, and I want to know a little bit more. So it's not something I saw myself doing. But actually, as it turned out, there are some transferable skills there that I didn't really appreciate or anticipate at the time.
Okay. It's amazing what you tend to fall into, right? But I think the good thing about it is I touched on this with someone else recently. The military gives you a solid kind of foundation to be able to pivot or fall into something and land on your feet and almost like adapt, right? Um, so okay, cool. So very much focus on partnering up with companies kind of pre and kind of post breach, right? Um, what type of things are you seeing in the market? If you just kind of give a high level overview right now, what's happening?
Sure. So, the ecosystem is a complex one. It's a busy one, and we work, as I said, across a number of different sectors. And I'm sure, as a lot of your audience and a lot of your previous guests have already elucidated on, ransomware continues to remain a big topic. But what we're seeing at the moment, and what I found particularly interesting over here, is the ways in which threat actors, the ways in which cyber criminals are adjusting their response, are responding to our response to organizations as they become better at defending and also better at responding to these incidents. However, an example of something that we've seen a lot of over the last year is the way that threat actors are adjusting when it comes to their leverage. Previously, and I'm talking kind of a couple of 2, 3 years ago, there were lines that were being drawn around groups that would or wouldn't touch certain organizations, healthcare, education being an example. That is simply not the case and hasn't actually been for some time, because some of these, and again, I'm talking about cyber criminals here, not necessarily those advanced persistent threats, are trying to maximize their leverage. And so we are seeing schools, healthcare institutions, anywhere that has that kind of information, that kind of leverage, if you're a threat actor, available, being targeted more and more, as well as your more traditional sectors, so the financial sector, manufacturing sectors, and of course, technology.
Why do you think that their scope, the attacker's scope, of targeting smaller or companies that you think there would be that line? Why do you think they're now crossing that metaphorical line?
I think it comes back to that point around leverage. So they
Mm,
know if they are, for example, an extortion group, or if they are a group that is determined to extract money from an organization as a result as a result of ransomware, that those groups will, or are in some cases, more likely to respond or to interact with them because of the kind of data that they look after and the access they have. They may also not have the capabilities that some of these larger organizations have.
Mm.
And again, this is not my immediate area of expertise. But what we have seen, as I've already mentioned, is the amount is the way in which organizations have been changing and the way that their defenses have been getting stronger. So it's a
Mhm.
combination of that leverage, and it's also a combination of the access and the capability that many of these organizations do or don't have.
Well, it might not be your area of expertise, but I did another podcast and kind of asked a similar question and not too long ago. So it's not out yet. So you definitely haven't watched it. They said something very, very similar. They said,
Okay.
right, okay, everyone seems to think, right, okay, the big FTSE, I don't know, 250 companies, they're the targets, right? But now they're not. The ethical lines have just totally disappeared, and everyone's just kind of trying to go out to get whatever they can grab, regardless of the
Mhm.
type of company. I think probably because a lot of companies at the larger scale are investing heavily into so they're the whales, right? They're the hard to grab. They're investing heavily into their security posture. They're like, okay, well, it's not worth it. Let's go after the people that aren't, they think that they're safe. They're not going to get attacked. Whether that's true or not is a completely different story. But
I mean,
okay,
the other thing I would actually say just on that point is
yeah,
that many of these smaller companies are still connected in some way to these
uh-huh.
larger companies. These threat actors may not necessarily be going in the front door of these companies, but in other cases, they know that the supply chains are big, they're complex, and that some of these smaller organizations that may not have the defenses in place, that some of these large ones do, are, as I said, the sort of the side window in many respects. But some of these even smaller organizations are getting better and better every day.
So what about crisis communication then? When it comes to dealing with an incident, because this is your area, right? Crisis comms. Um, what are we seeing there? Are companies still coming to you? Well, obviously they are because you're super busy, which is fantastic. But are people just not aware of what to do from a PR or crisis comms perspective? And do you have to kind of do a lot of work in educating people pre or post breach and what to do?
So it's a great question, and the first thing I'll say is that most organisations, whether they're large or small, do have a communications function. You know, it's part of their business every day. Whether it's marketing, whether it's talking to their stakeholders, whether it's talking to their investors, they know how to communicate, and also they know how to communicate with their people. Um, However, during a cyber incident, there are a couple of things that are different, and I'll go into those in a bit later. But your communication strategy is one component of an organization's response. It's
Mhm.
also a critical one. We work alongside existing teams. So I've said, many of those communications functions may exist internally. We'll work alongside those teams, but we'll also work alongside those other experts. So external legal counsel, your digital forensics and investigation firms, and law enforcement to ensure that at a very basic level, the right things are getting said to the right people at the right time. And the effect of this really of managing this process is twofold. Firstly, it provides a company with that specialist knowledge, that expertise, to be able to operate in the immediate aftermath of an incident. So those heady kind of first 72 hours where there may be some operational disruption. And what we can do is come in and relieve some of that pressure, because the last thing your response teams need is those tens, hundreds, thousands, in some cases, of stakeholders coming in and asking questions and rightly wanting to understand what is going on. That is taking away from your ability to respond to that organization, to that threat or to that cyber attack as an organization. So the first thing we do is provide in those early hours that space for those organizations to react. And I guess the second thing as well is looking slightly further ahead. Unfortunately, or fortunately, because we have been through this so many times, we are able to anticipate some of those future requirements. And I've already said we work alongside a number of those different advisory organizations. But by looking further ahead, you're allowing an organization to plan further ahead. And then you can help them anticipate what might be coming around the corner. So whether it's the data subject notifications, whether it's media scrutiny, or indeed government scrutiny, by handling that immediate first 72 hours, you're providing them the space to respond at an operational level. By looking further ahead, you're also allowing them to plan for that uncertainty or for those different scenarios that might be coming around the corner. And yes, there are teams that have that capability, that communications capability. What we do is layer on top of that specialist knowledge that we've had, as I said, unfortunately, from going through a few of these.
I think the ability to pause during a crisis, take a breath, think, compose yourself before you respond is so vital, right? Especially if it's something super major, you're just going to start, as military term, flapping, and kind of have a bit of a cloudy mind and not carry
Yeah.
out the best action. So that's something again that's transferable from the military. So what's the first 72 hours? Obviously, very vital, right? And that's
Yeah.
where you come in. Okay, cool. This is what we recommend. What happens? I don't know if you can disclose this. Maybe perhaps like a scenario where someone or a business has really kind of made a mistake from a comms perspective, or if you can't answer that, what are the risks to a business if they don't use the right language in communication?
Again, it's a good question because at all times we are and when we're working for companies, we're trying to demonstrate transparency and accountability. There is nothing worse, and you've all seen it when companies try and slope their shoulders and avoid the issue. That is not what we're in the business of doing. But at the
Mhm.
same time, what we want to avoid is getting ahead of the situation. And what I mean by that is that it's absolutely understandable that in those first 72 hours, whatever time frame we're looking, it is tempting to want to control the narrative. And the way that many people may do that is by getting themselves in front of camera, getting themselves in front of the media, and talking through what they perceive to be the situation.
Mm.
But I think and this is one of the key differences, as you know, with a cyber incident, is the timeline, and the difference between even other crises is the pace at which the incident occurs, and the response thereafter. So what I mean by that is that in other situations you may have more of the facts. Actually, during cybersecurity incident, you do not, and it may be a Friday night, as we always know, that it comes in. It may take hours, days, weeks, months even to get a clear understanding of what has actually come on and occurred. And what we want to avoid doing is in those early hours where it's understandable, the situation is known, is putting people or getting messages out there that then have to be walked back. Or indeed, and this is much rarer, people choose to come out and just say something that isn't true. And the kind of number one rule of any communications is don't lie, because you will be found out. And from a reputational, just a stakeholder, just a people management perspective, it is fundamental that what you do is based on fact, not speculation. And people understand that. One of the other things that I'll say is that as stakeholders, as audiences have become more familiar with cyber attacks and what happens afterwards, understandably, they ask the kind of questions that weren't being asked a couple, 2 or 3 years ago, because they know what happens, they know what to expect. But it is occasionally a mistake to respond to that pressure by, as I've said, getting out and speculating, or worse than that, lying. It is better to weather that initial storm, to weather that barrage, get your facts in order, to use the expression you had, to not flap, and to take a pause and go, okay, what is it that we know here? What is it that we can share to demonstrate transparency, but also what we're doing, and not speculating, and absolutely not saying anything that isn't untrue.
How hard is it at the heat of the moment? You're engaged with a business. It might be a CEO, CTO, large organization, or even small. And you're saying, right, okay, I really think it's beneficial for us to go along this line. And they're adamant, right, actually, well, no, it's my business. It's obviously like it might be my head on the line, so to speak. How easy is it to encourage that buy-in and build that trust in like a high pressure situation like that? It's a difficult question.
It's not always easy. You're absolutely right, and it's very different when it's your company.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm going to say this, but I really mean it. Is each one of these we go into, it is like it is happening to us, and the first thing we have to do is understand what works for that company and what works for that client. When something you have built is crumbling before your eyes, or is the risk of crumbling before your eyes, the last thing you need is for advisors to come in and tell you, okay, right, this is the way it should be done. So you're absolutely right. What you've got to do first and quickly is build up that level of trust. And coming back to kind of why I got into comms, I think one of the key parts is that it forces you to do that. We in the immediate aftermath of an incident, and we're often called when things have obviously gone south, as many of the people you've spoken to are, have very little time to do that. But we know that what we are writing, that what we're drafting, what we're putting in front of people to then speak, whether it's in front of a broad audience or in front of their employees, is coming from them, and therefore it's almost a key, a sort of a hack, to use popular terms, to develop that kind of trust. Because if you're putting something in front of someone, they've then got to stand in front of a camera or an audience and say, they've got to know that they can trust you. And there are times where it doesn't work, and there are times that you adjust. But it's having the humility to understand that, but it's also understanding, okay, from our experience, what is going to work with this organization. And I'll say, some of our experiences have been straightforward, and obviously some haven't. But the impact can be very different. If your employees, for example, can't get paid as a result of an incident, you are going to say one thing. However, if ambulances have to be diverted as a result of an incident, you're going to say something else. So you have to be able, as a supporting team, as a communications team, to handle both of those situations. And that's where it comes down to that ability to empathize, to understand, and build that trust quickly. But it's not easy, and it has to happen quickly.
Empathy is a solid answer. So thanks to that. I think empathy is such a huge thing in the incident response arena. To be honest, any arena in life. It's a lot of people that we speak to. It's like, if you're going to be the bearer of bad news, or someone's going through a bad situation on a Friday night, you don't know what's going on outside of work as well. If you can't empathize with your client, you're not going to be set up for success, right? So I think that's brilliant. Solid answer. It's been really interesting. On a closing note, if I'm a company and I've just been breached, I don't have a clue what to do from a comms perspective, what would your advice be outside of giving you a call?
The first thing is just to pause.
Yep.
But what you want to do is you want to get the facts down. So the first thing we will always put together is a set of key messages. That is your communication spine, that it can be updated. Those are the facts that you know, and that informs everything that you are going to say and draft and write. Once you've got those, the rest of the material can follow. And each piece may require nuance, but once you've got those key messages dialed in, and you're ready to update them, that's the first thing we often do. And then after that, the second thing shortly is something like a holding statement. So getting ready for that initial question: what's going on? What have you done? Who's affected? Those are probably my top two tips.
Okay, and the third one's give you a call.
That is actually the first one, but
that's the first one. Okay, that's brilliant. Tom, it's been really insightful. I think there's a lot of benefit to crisis communications and anything that adds to that whole IR arena. So I'm sure if anyone's got any questions around anything we've discussed, you'll be happy for them to reach out. But it's been really interesting, and thanks for coming on.
Of course, thanks very much for having me, Charlie.